Welcome to the Adobe Theater. My name is Carl Soule, and over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to be diving into some of the workflows that are used on big budget Hollywood feature films, that are used on network dramas. I'm actually based in the Hollywood office within Adobe. We actually have a separate group, including separate engineers for tools like Adobe Premiere Pro, for being able to handle interoperability and workflows that are necessary when we start talking about the highest levels of production work. Hollywood is still a very segmented market where we have best-in-class people working on the edit, a different team of people that is going to do the final sound mix, a different group of people might touch and work on the color and the final conform. And because of this, it's necessary to not only work within the Adobe tools themselves, but it's also very, very important for tools like Adobe Premiere to be able to export a file that can work in third-party applications. And we actually have our own group of engineers that helps with these types of workflows, making sure that sound turnovers are efficient, turnover for final conform, for color. These types of workflows, very, very important within a Hollywood workflow. One of the most important things that I've discovered in the several years that I've been working with Hollywood editors is that the beginnings of the workflow can determine how smooth these turnover processes can be at the end. So I'm going to share with you some of the best practices that we have from Hollywood if you are planning on doing a production where you are going to hand off this sound to a Pro Tools artist who's going to do the final mix. Or if you're going to be working with somebody using Baselight for doing the final color grading, we can work and do a lot within the Adobe tool set, but we want to make sure that it's a good experience as you move into these other applications as well. So I'm going to stand here and talk a little bit about that. And to get started, I want to talk about how we ingest files and how we actually work with the very, very first parts of production work. So I have a blank Premiere Pro project on the screen here, and I'm going to start to ingest and import some media. Now, normally I would just go and find my media and start bringing in files. And I'm sure many of you have done this a million times. I'll just import a single file here just to talk a little bit about metadata. One of the things that drives these types of workflows is making sure that we have all of the correct metadata columns, all the correct information coming across with the files. And we also want to make it as easy for the lead editor in a group of editors to work with this footage efficiently. So the file names, if you're just importing the files directly, the file names generally don't tell me a lot of information about scene, take information. I get a little bit of metadata information. Looks like the scene is actually embedded in this file, but I don't know what shot it is. I didn't get any log notes. Color data didn't come across. This is not going to be an efficient way of working. Now, if this is the only way I can get the files, Premiere Pro does actually have a special workspace called the Meta Logging Workspace that's designed to allow you to add this additional information. But in most cases on high-end productions, the people that are generating these dailies files generally already have all of the metadata in a convenient, easy-to-use file format that comes with the dailies. It's something called an ALE file. So if I jump over to my Finder window here, I'll just open up this folder here. You can see I have a file here called Footprints Day 1. That's the name of the production. That's the first day of production here. And this is in a .ale file format. An ALE file is human readable. It is a type of spreadsheet that is column-based. If I had Excel on my system here, I could open it up in Excel. But just to show you it's human readable, I can even use text editor to actually see all the various metadata. I can see the list of columns up at the top. TextEdit is not the best tool for keeping the formatting correct, so it's a little bit off kilter there. But you can see there's a wide range of different types of metadata, including color information, sound roll information, tape names, LUT information, what LUTs were applied to the footage before it was brought in. So using an ALE file is a common way of keeping that metadata information. And the great thing about this is with Premiere, I can import an ALE file, link up my footage in a quick and easy step here. So I'm just going to grab one of these clips. Should be in here. There we go. Click OK. Let this locate and match up all the rest of my footage. And now, instead of having to deal with, crazy file names, I can actually look and see each shot. I can see each take. I can see this is a multi-camera shoot with 2 cameras, and I have the A camera and the B cameras available for each of my different shots. So in one step, it gives me the capability of just lining everything up. And again, now I have some additional metadata information. I have the shot information. I've got some color values here that are going to be important for the colorist later on. Now, what happens if I don't get all of the metadata? Now, this sometimes happens. The people who are making these files are in a rush. They're trying to get them ready, send them out to the editorial team. Sometimes all the metadata doesn't get put in the ALE file. Premiere has a mechanism built into it where if I start with an ALE file, I can choose to update the metadata at any point in the process. And in fact, what I can do here, I'm going to go ahead and add a couple more metadata columns here. Premiere is very, very flexible about what type of metadata can be revealed within a project. If you're working with stuff shot on 35mm film, having the key code and the lab information is important. I can add sound roll, sound timecode information. I'm also going to add the LUT fields here. So if I have LUTs, lookup tables applied to the footage, I want to be able to see those within my metadata columns. And I can also make this window full screen here. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And now it almost looks like I'm using Premiere Pro like a spreadsheet. But it is very important to have all of this information. And I can see right now my LUT information didn't get included. Well, this again would be where I would pick up the phone, whoever developed these, the offline media for us, I would call them, say, hey, I didn't get the LUT information. Can you send over a new ALE file? Once I get that within Premiere, I don't have to start over. I simply click on, do that one more time so you can see it. Click on Clip, Update Metadata, and all I have to do is point at the new updated ALE file, and that LUT information is now coming across. It has updated the metadata information without having to re-ingest or re-import or put that information in by hand. Very, very important. Now that I've got all of this footage, and I can look through this very effectively because I have real world names as opposed to, the crazy names that our cameras give footage, I can now start to see, hey, I've got a bunch of multicam shots, and my footage actually doesn't have any sound information. I have to rely on the original sound rolls, and I have to merge picture and sound together. There are many ways to merge picture and sound together. If you're just going to export out to YouTube or you're publishing a finished piece, any of the methods within Premiere Pro work really, really well. But again, if I have a metadata-driven workflow where I need to export my project out to a third-party tool like Pro Tools, the best practice that I can give you guys is use multicam. In fact, in most cases, I just recommend using multicam because it's a batch process. I can do all of my clips all at the same time and match picture and sound together in one step. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to select everything. Picture, sound, all of my footage. I'm going to say create multi-camera. I am fortunate with these assets. These actually have matching time code. But if necessary, this process also works if I had sound timecode information. And the way I would have sound timecode information would come from the ALE file. So you see how these different steps build on top of each other. I'm going to use a little trick here. And this is sort of kind of a secret thing, but I want to make sure everybody's aware of it. If I leave the audio set to use camera 1, if camera 1 is selected there and one of the clips for each of the multicam groups is a WAV file or an AIFF file, if it's a standalone audio file, that automatically says, right, use that, ignore the camera audio. So what this means, I click OK, and all of my multicams get built. Oh, it's giving me an error. Well, this error is saying it couldn't find some matches. It used all the timecode information, lined up picture, lined up sound in many, many, many cases, but there's a couple of clips it couldn't find. Let me check the names of those clips. All right. B-roll, B-roll, B-roll. Yeah, those are the clips of the director. We shot a bunch of footage of the director. I don't have a match for them. I don't have any sound for them. They're just extra images to use later on. It's taken all of the other clips, thrown them in a process clip folder for me. The rest of these are multicams. So let me go back to my main interface here. So if I load up a multicam, I can see the two different cameras within the shot. I can start to cut with this. And one of the other more important things when I work with Premiere with a multicam, I always have the ability to go in and view it in a timeline view, just in case I have to nudge the picture and sound, because time code is always perfect. No, no, it's not. Many times the jam sync timecode can drift a bit. I always have the ability to pop open into the multicam view, look at camera 1 on V1, camera 2 on V2, check my sound, make sure everything lines up and stays in perfect sync. Okay, so again, picture and sound, very, very easy to make this happen. If I go into the metadata of any of my B-roll shots, like here's this shot here, I scroll over a little bit, you'll see that there's LUT information, but there's also what are called CDL values that are associated with this clip. There's some CDL values there, ASC, SOP. CDL values, CDL stands for color decision list, and this is part of a modern color workflow. When clips are taken out of the camera, most of the time people are shooting in a RAW format. The clips look very bad. They're milky, they're linear, they're log, so everything is kind of blown out. We want to have something that looks good to shoot or to edit with, so that we don't spend all of our time, looking at the bad foot or the log footage, that we want to use that to grade later on. So many times our dailies have color baked in. Typically you have a couple of different LUTs, like a show LUT and a scene LUT. You also have the CDL values, which are little values for just adjusting maybe a little bit more red, a little bit more blue in the shadows. It's an easy way of sending color information that the cinematographer may do on the camera. Adobe's working hard on a non-destructive dailies workflow for color. And with a combination of Lumetri and this new effect that we have, I'm just going to just take this single shot here, open it up in these effect controls. You'll notice that there's a new effect in here called ASC CDL. So these are the color decision list, or the CDL numbers being applied as an effect. So if I have this information, I can use this in conjunction with LUTs, load the LUTs up in Lumetri, and I have non-destructive color. If the director is looking at a shot and says, oh wait, the highlights look all blown out in the window there, can we see if there's anything in there we can recover later on? I can turn off all this color information and see the original linear color space to see if there's any more detail in that area that's been blown out. So one area that we're doing a lot of work with. Today, we actually we work with and actually can import the CDL values as a live color effect that can be tweaked and modified. The LUTs still need to be applied manually, but we're working on trying to improve on that workflow as we move forward. Again, this is the type of thing that the Hollywood team can focus specifically on by having our own engineering group that works really closely with the main Premiere Pro group, but we can think about Hollywood-based workflows a little bit more focused on that particular market. All right, a couple more things quickly to show you here. I am going to jump into a different project. So I want to talk a little bit about how we set up our sequences these days. In the past, we would just get our dailies in 1920 by 1080. We would edit in a typical 1920 by 1080 world. And that would pretty much be the end of the discussion. But nowadays, because we're getting footage from so many different cameras in so many different formats, we might be getting the original footage might be 6K, it might be 5K, it might be 8K, it might be 2.78 to 1 aspect ratio, it might be shot on anamorphic lenses and it's even wider than that. Premiere is very, very flexible on the size of the raster, and every project is resolution independent so that you can actually have different timelines at different resolutions if you need to. The maximum size for Premiere Pro is something like 26 megapixels in any direction. So for example, I could set up a timeline that's 10K by 2K if I needed to do something crazy for like a projector screen. A more realistic example is to use a resolution that matches the aspect ratio of what I'm going to be delivering at, specifically the aspect ratio. So a lot of the films that I've worked with, rather than being 1920 by 1080, they'll do things like 1920 by 858 or 2K by 858, something that's maybe a little bit wider than 16 by 9. They basically match the aspect ratio of the deliverable. It means that you don't have to have black bars burned into your footage, and it means that you can deliver your offline media. You can tell the people who are creating the offline media for you to deliver at the original aspect ratio of the source clips. So what this means, this particular clip here, if I match frame into this, you can see right away this clip is a lot wider than what I'm actually seeing here. I'm getting kind of a cropped version of this. And if I click on this clip and reveal the properties of it, you can see that this footage is actually 2592 by 1080. That probably matches up with one of those crazy aspect ratios from like a red camera, like a 5K or a 7K. They're all slightly different aspect ratios, but the key here is this clip is a fraction of the original high-res resolution. What does that mean for me? Well, as an editor, if I'm working with the director and the director says, you know, can we reposition this shot a little bit? If I am just working with the regular 1920 by 1080 footage, I'll have it already pre-cropped, or I'll have black bars burned into it. Any repositioning I do here is going to be something that has to be eye matched later on when the conform happens. It makes the conform process more difficult. But if I'm working with the original aspect ratio of the footage, the mathematics work out perfectly so that I can come in here and I can say, you know, take this clip and let's maybe push it over a little bit. That's more the framing that we want on this particular shot. And because I've done this, when we go back to conform the footage to the high res later on, everything will line up. It doesn't have to be eye matched shot by shot for any repos, any zooms that we're doing. Another thing that I quickly want to talk about is the idea of using the best performances even if the best performances were not in the same take. Now, if you've heard a lot about us talking about working with David Fincher's editorial staff on Netflix shows like Mindhunter or feature films like Gone Girl, a lot of the production work there is done using split screen compositions. Maybe the actor on this side of the screen had their best take was on take 5, but the actor on this side of the screen really nailed it in take 3. And now as I'm looking at it, I want them both to kind of speed up a little bit, and I want them to talk over each other a little bit. In the past, we'd say, no, forget that. But we have the tools, we can now do this, and this is something that was used, I think something like 80% of the shots on Gone Girl were some kind of split screen composition. So that's not a movie you would expect to be visual effects heavy, but it was actually a lot of After Effects compositing to make this happen. Because After Effects and Premiere Pro work together so well, Premiere has some basic controls for doing masking and opacity. And here I've just kind of created a really simple example. I've taken the same clip twice on my timeline here. One version of this, there's the original shot, but I need to speed up the horses a little bit, and I want to grab a section from later on. Now, as the editor, I don't have time to make this perfect. I'm kind of doing this, it's like carving with a chainsaw. You know, I want to make it basic just to get the feel of it so the director looks at it and goes, yeah, I kind of like that better. But everything that I do here, the mask that I'm creating in Premiere Pro, the tracking that I'm creating in Premiere Pro, when I send this over to After Effects, I didn't even have a composition open, it creates an After Effects mask, and it creates After Effects keyframes that can be modified further at this point. So all the work that I do as my temp comp becomes the starting position for the After Effects artist down the hall who's going to finish the composition and use advanced functions in After Effects like, you know, per vertex feathering with the mask feather tool and really, really dial things in further from here. So very, very common workflow we see in Hollywood. Okay, moving right along. Couple last things that I wanted to talk to. First off, this is a feature that I get a lot of questions about, people who are switching to Premiere Pro. There's a belief that, let's say I've got a complicated scene, many audio layers, and as I've delivered my editor's cut, the director comes in and says, you know what? I think this scene would play back better in a different part of the edit. I want to be able to pick up this whole scene, move it up into the source monitor so that I can move it to a different section of the edit. I've had people try this by using like the selection tools, and you can do that, but we actually do have a keyboard shortcut. And if you're not familiar with the keyboard shortcuts, we have more keyboard shortcuts hidden in here than we have keys on the keyboard. So one of them that you should know about is something called Make Subsequence, or Make Subsequence from in to out. This one ignores track targeting, so it will get absolutely everything. And what this looks like, I'll just go ahead and use the regular one here. Shift-U grabs everything, every audio track, all the video tracks, loads it up into the source monitor so that I can cut it in a different position. And by the way, Premiere can also show what is in the timeline, what's in the source monitor, as well as what's in the main timeline. And it's even possible to stack these two so that you can see and cut from one into the other as needed. So very, very flexible workflow inside of Premiere. If you didn't know you can load multiple clips into the source monitor via subsequences, you can. And of course, you can have both views in timeline view available to you. Okay, last couple things, talking about exports. If I'm taking a sequence and I'm exporting this out, for audio, OMF is still in Premiere, it's still supported, it's kind of a last resort. OMF has not been modified or changed in quite a while. The format is deprecated. It's a format that is no longer being developed by the industry. As we've been asking for like making changes to the format and things, we just continue to be told, don't use OMF, use AAF. So we keep it in the software for edge cases, but for the most part, AAF is the format of choice for sending out for sound. Now, you may have missed it. I'm going to do this one more time so that you can see it. When I choose to export out an AAF, watch, there's a quick dialogue. It only is on the screen for a quick second. Ready? And simplifying project, oh, it's gone. What is that doing? It takes my timeline and it prepares the timeline for export for sound. This means any nested items within the timeline, like multicams, get flattened in the background automatically for me so that when I'm exporting the AAF file, the correct metadata, the clip names, the sound timecode information, all of that translates correctly across. And I know this works. It worked. The last film that I saw this on, we were delivering to Skywalker Sound. It worked good. There weren't a lot of issues to deal with. And another trick about AAF is if the edit changes at the last minute and you've already exported out an AAF, you already have all of these audio clips in a folder someplace, if you export another AAF with a different edit to that same folder, it will not rebuild all the media for you. It'll know that your media is already there, so you can quickly get a last minute change out without having to re-export all of the audio files. Turning over for color, XML files or EDL files are used for this. You'll notice we've added some different boxes for things like ASC CDL values, sound roll information, 32-bit character names, as well as checking different boxes for different delivery items. The EDL format, while it's one of the oldest formats out there, it hasn't officially been updated since 1984. People are still using it in the industry, and they've kind of added little bits and pieces to it over the years, and Adobe is keeping up with the industry as necessary to deliver EDL files with advanced functions like CDL and LUT information to make the colorist job much easier. And lastly, just a little trick when you're dealing with an XML file. Premiere has the ability to export out to Apple Final Cut Pro XML, the original FCP7 XML format. Very common workflow for going out to other third-party tools. The one key factor here is make sure you have the right thing selected when you choose to export out your XML file. If I have nothing selected and I choose to export out an XML file, what do you think it's going to put in the XML file? Every sequence, every part of the project, and those are when I get the phone call from people saying, my XML file doesn't import into this other tool. Well, it's probably too complicated and too big. If you know you only need one sequence, select the sequence and then choose to export out the XML file. You'll get a much smaller XML file when you do this, and more than likely that'll solve the issue of what you're dealing with that's having trouble with the XML import. That's pretty much all the time I have for today. One quick last thing, I can't get away without showing you this. One thing that we dealt with on the last film that I was working on, a film called Only the Brave, we did a lot of test screenings. And as part of that, the editorial staff used the built-in DCP functionality within Creative Cloud. Good practice to have with this is to render out to like a ProRes or a DNX file first, and then bring that into Media Encoder and create the DCP off of that. But the turnaround to create a DCP file was roughly 6 hours with that crew. Normally, if I need to go to a third party and export out a DCP file for showing at a film festival or something like that, the average turnover in the industry is about 72 hours. So the editor was able to get a much newer cut, most current cut out for a test screening using the built-in DCP output from Media Encoder and Creative Cloud. That's just a little taste of what we're doing in Hollywood. If you guys have any questions, I'll be around kind of in the back for a bit, but otherwise, thank you guys so much.